Hello, my name is Valerie Nash, and I serve as the Chief of Staff of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. I am honored to be here today with two of our nation's most distinguished civil rights leaders. Welcome, Mr. Derrick Johnson. Welcome, Rabbi Marc Schneier. Mr. Derrick Johnson serves as the President and CEO of the NAACP, a title he has held since October of 2017. President Johnson formerly served as Vice Chairman of the NAACP National Board of Directors. Under his leadership, the NAACP has undertaken such efforts as the 2018 Log Out Facebook campaign, pressuring Facebook after reports of Russian hackers targeting African Americans. The 2020 We Are Done Dying campaign, exposing the inequities embedded into the American healthcare system and the country at large, and Fighting for Our Vote campaign to engage more people in the fight for federal voting legislation. Rabbi Marc Schneier is the president of FFEU, which is the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. Rabbi Schneier founded FFEU in 1989 with the late Joseph Papp, while tensions were increasing between the Jewish and African American communities. For the past 33 years, FFEU has been instrumental in repairing this historic alliance. In 2014, as it celebrated its 25th anniversary, FFEU was honored by the United States Congress as the National Address for Black-Jewish Relations. Rabbi Schneier is also the author of Shared Dreams, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Jewish Community. I feel honored to work and serve at FFEU as the Chief of Staff. I marvel at the breadth and depth of work that the Foundation has done for the past 3 decades to strengthen Black-Jewish relations and rebuild the historic Black-Jewish alliance. Rabbi Schneier and President Johnson have a history of collaboration. Recently, they worked together on FFEU's unprecedented Civil Rights Leadership Series with Mr. Mark Morial of the National Urban League, Reverend Jesse Jackson of the Rainbow Push Coalition, Reverend Al Sharpton of the National Action Network, and Dr. Charles Steele of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Today, we are here for a very important discussion celebrating Black History Month, a conversation on Black-Jewish relations in the United States. We only have 25 minutes to touch on a variety of topics, so let us begin. President Johnson, we will begin with you. Black and Jewish Americans founded the NAACP in 1909. Would you elaborate on the historic role that the Jewish community has played in both founding and sustaining the NAACP?
Good, great question. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. NAACP is now 113 years old. But understanding the history and why it was necessary for NAACP really would take you to the 1800s when there were a war among states where Southern landowners wanted to have and maintain a domestic policy outlook that was based on agricultural economy. While Northern entrepreneurs wanted to transition our economy to be an industrial-based economy. Mm-hmm. That was driven by a public policy conversation which led to an argument, which led to a fistfight, which led to articles of secession, which was seen as a declaration of war. We call it the Civil War. And that's really where the one of the questions around the NAACP's foundings really starts. And as a result of Africans taking up arms and reinforcing Sherman's troops, we defeated the Confederacy. That's important because the Confederacy was based on white supremacy. This notion that there was a caste system that must be maintained in this nation. And at this particular time, white was only considered those individuals who were white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males.
Right.
It didn't include the Jewish community. It didn't include Irish, Italians, or African Americans for that matter. It's a social construct. But African Americans took up arms, helped defeat the Confederacy, which led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now, this was during a time that where many Jewish immigrants began to migrate to this nation looking for a better way of life because of some of the persecutions that was taking place in Europe, because there was many battles across the landscape. America seemed to be a safe haven for the Jewish community at this time. And as a result, many of the efforts Africans, now Americans, because we were granted citizenships, fought for also were the issues that many other immigrants could also appreciate. In 1908, there was a group of African Americans who met in Niagara. That was W.B. Du Bois, William Monroe Trotter, Ida B. Wells, and they decided to begin to push back against the rise of white supremacy called redemption. That very next year, there was a race riot in Springfield, Illinois. And many of those individuals who were not considered white, they was from the Jewish community. That's from many communities say, wait a minute, we cannot have a true democracy if we allow this type of mob violence in the street. And those two groups came together in New York. The original group of African Americans who recognized race problems with American white supremacy will be a threat to not only us, but to democracy, and many others like Mary Wright Overton's and many others who came together and they met in New York. That was the founding of the NAACP.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Rabbi Schneier, I don't know if you wish to comment on what President Johnson has said, but let me ask you this question as well. You are the author of Shared Dreams, Dr. Martin Luther King and the Jewish Community. Would you comment on the singular role that the Jewish community has played in support of Dr. King and the Black community during the civil rights struggle?
Well, thank you, Valerie, and I am truly honored to join in this conversation with a friend and such a distinguished civil rights leader as Derrick Johnson. To really supplement, if not to add to what President Johnson said, there was no other ethnic community in the United States that played such a significant role in support of Dr. King and the Black community as did the Jewish community during the 1960s. And it was that historic alliance of Blacks and Jews that brought about some of the greatest social and political changes in the history of our nation. But what was so unique about Martin Luther King Jr., that Dr. King understood that a people who fight for their own rights are only as honorable as when they fight for the rights of all people.
Right.
So that Dr. King not only championed the civil rights of the Black community, but he also fought for the civil rights and concerns of the Jewish community. He was a tireless advocate for the Jewish homeland, for the state of Israel. He was involved at the time. The great cause célèbre of the Jewish community was freeing the Jews in the former Soviet Union, his many references to the Holocaust. And Dr. King had a zero tolerance, a total disdain for anti-Semitism, particularly when that began to emerge within the more militant wing of the civil rights struggle. So that when we examine the civil rights struggle, it is not a dynamic of what the Jewish community did for the Black community. Two-way street, true partnership. No question that the Jewish community was at the forefront, more so than any other community in the U.S. At the same time, particularly during Black History Month, we must celebrate acknowledge the role that Dr. King and his associates played on behalf of the American Jewish community as well.
Thank you, Rabbi Schneier, for your comments. President Johnson, just over 1 week ago, you and Rabbi Schneier penned an op-ed on voting rights featured in Newsweek. On voting rights, President Biden recently spoke about this moment of being a choice between John King and Bull Connor. What role can the historic Black-Jewish alliance play in combating attempts at voter suppression of Black and brown minorities?
Well, we are living in a period where the reemergence of white supremacist activity has been emboldened by the past administration. And when you have that type of climate, it is incumbent upon all targeted communities to stand boldly together and fight back. And in a democracy, our vote is our currency. It is the ability to select and elect policymakers who will carry forth policies that would impact the quality of our lives and protect the very nature of our future. That's the responsibility of this alliance, to ensure that this democracy is inclusive of all, that white supremacist behavior is snuffed out wherever it exists, that we stand boldly and speak out against those who harbor and allow for that type of climate to continue to commit murders at synagogues and bomb Black churches, because at the end of the day, no matter where we think we are now, the forces of white supremacy, they're marching forward to redefine our future to look more like our past. And it's important for us to define our future so it can look like the future that we will want our children to live in. And that can only be done through an alliance.
Wonderful. Rabbi Schneier.
History is repeating itself. Go back to the 1960s. Go back to the Freedom Riders, Freedom Summers of the college students coming down from the North to assist the Black community.
Right.
In voter registration. What's so fascinating about that movement, hundreds if not thousands of college students, more than 70% were Jews, at a time when the Jewish population in America was only 2% of the general population. And that led to the Voters' Rights Act of 1965, and why this historic alliance must be reinvigorated, must be galvanized. There is a clear attempt to suppress voting rights for the Black community, for other minority communities. We have, in the Jewish community, we have a noble history of being there and fighting and combating shoulder to shoulder with the leadership of the Black community. Here we are 60 years later, and we must heed that call.
And I just want to add, if you allow the votes of Blacks to be suppressed, you open the door for anti-Semitic behavior to exist. Correct. If you allow for the Black vote to have a voice in the formation of public policy, we have a history to understand that otherness is an attack on all of us.
Right.
And our communities have all suffered through otherness.
Right.
And we must stand in solidarity, push back, and fight against otherness.
Thank you, President Johnson, for that important point. Thank you, Rabbi Marc Schneier. Rabbi Schneier, you touched upon the state of Israel. So let me ask this question. While there are many issues on which the Black and Jewish communities align, there are also issues which some in our respective communities differ. For example, conflicting views on the state of Israel. How can the Black and Jewish alliance continue to be strengthened despite some of these differences?
Well, first I must say that unequivocally, the civil rights leadership of the Black community in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has stood in solidarity with the state of Israel. If you look at the Congressional Black Caucus, when it comes to issues of Israel, they vote virtually identically with the members of the Jewish congressional delegation. I think there is some misunderstandings on the part of some in the black community. There's a lack of, again, understanding. There's some ignorance in terms of what the state of Israel, what it means, what it represents, for the Jewish community. But I always see, Valerie, every obstacle as an opportunity. And this is an opportunity for us to reach out to certain segments in the black community, to expand their horizons, to enlarge their interests, so that there is a great understanding. No one is asking anyone not to champion the rights of the Palestinians.
Right.
But at the same time, there is a need on the part of the Jewish community to educate and to sensitize certain segments in the black community as to what the state of Israel represents to us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, for us, it's very simple. We've always supported a two-state solution, right? But at the end of the day, we also recognize that there are forces who are seeking to pull the communities apart, to allow the fringes of both of our communities to dominate the public square. It is incumbent upon us to be the moral center of gravity, to pull people together, to see any challenge as an opportunity to create solutions. Here in this country, it didn't build out. Think about what would happen if the relationship between the Jewish and black community frail. None of us win. Because at the end of the day, those who have the interest of promoting white supremacy would like to destroy both of us. And so they will seize upon opportunities to identify cracks in the foundation. It's upon us, the rabbi, me, and many others, to seal the foundation, bring people together, and come to points of agreement and not allow the 3%, 1%, the fraction of percent of a disagreement tear up the 99.9% of all of us who recognize the common shared interests of moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you, President Johnson. I do have one final question. A significant percentage of American Jews identify as Jews of color, who report that they often feel caught between the black and Jewish communities, not really fully accepted within either. How can this group become a bridge that can more significantly connect our two communities? President Johnson.
I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I went to a high school where the most popular club in the school was called the Ethnic Club. Mr. Rowinski was Polish. And our high school was the most diverse high school in the country. in the state. And one of the things I learned from that is that the uniqueness of each individual is actually their genius. The uniqueness of our culture is our genius. And anytime you have someone who's straddling the fence of both being African American and Jewish, that is a unique place for all of us to learn from. It is a place where the Jewish community can really understand in a more intimate way the dynamics of structural racism and how race shows up in one's life. It's a unique opportunity for the African American community to understand the diversity of religious experience and cultural experience through religion, which we already do because we go, for example, 30% of blacks in Philadelphia are Muslim. Then you have individuals who are part of the Christian faith, but being a part of the Christian faith, if you're a CME compared to Church Christ Holiness, that's a world of difference. And being a black Jew only add more character to that uniqueness.
Right.
In most cases, I have found that if we highlight that uniqueness is our genius and not the uniqueness as a problem, we benefit from it. And so we need to spend more time identifying what's the benefit of having the cross-pollination of African American experience and a Jewish cultural religious experience. Those things can come together and really make everyone stronger.
You know, the Jews of color is a growing demographic in the American Jewish community. It's now close to 10% of the American Jewish community. And I find that Jewish leadership and Jewish institutions are striving more to include Jews of color, not only into the mainstream Jewish community, but even into leadership positions. And it has also forced members of the Jewish community to re-examine generalizations as to what is the meaning of how a Jew looks like. So, you take, like, for example, the state of Israel. There are 125,000 black Jews in the state of Israel. I mean, how many people are even cognizant of the fact, that you have that kind of diversity? They came from Ethiopia. I'm proud that the state of Israel, not the United States, not England, France, the state of Israel is the only country in the history of the world to have ever taken blacks out of Africa en masse for freedom. So the fact that we see this emergence of Jews of color, whether it's here in the U.S., whether in Israel, it's an opportunity not only for the Jewish community to re-examine and to begin to be more educated on what it means to be a Jew of color, but at the same time, it's a great opportunity to develop what I would describe as an empathetic imagination, so that we can also embrace our co-religionists, not only for their faith, but for their ethnicity as well.
A story to that. So I grew up in Detroit, I live in Mississippi, and the first chairman of SNCC is Chuck McDew. Chuck McDew, African Americans who went to South Carolina State University, where Ella Baker had the meeting. He was elected as the first chairman before John Lewis succeeded him, and then after that was Stokely Carmichael. And Chuck would always tell the story how the Jewish community got involved with Freedom Summer and a lot of civil rights movement, particularly in Mississippi. He was dating a young Jewish girl who went to yeshiva, right? And he got on campus, and he ran across another guy who became one of the famous SNCC organizers by the name of Larry Rubin. I don't know if you know Larry Rubin down in D.C. And so Chuck is sitting there, he's dating a girl, he run across Larry. Larry said, "What are you working on?" He said, "Come to Mississippi with me." Right? And Larry got involved, and he was one of the first Jewish kids to get down there, but Mickey Schreiner was already there.
Correct.
Right? But Mickey was working for CORE, and these were students.
Right.
And it became such an interesting story because then Chuck talked about his evolution and becoming a Jew. One of the first black Jews that was a part of the civil rights movement who converted, and how he began to bring people together. So when they had the first meeting in Oxford, Ohio, with the kids to come down to Freedom Summer, they recruited the kids they knew. It was African American kids from HBCUs and Jewish kids who went to the schools that would allow Jewish kids to go, because don't forget, Jewish kids at this time, they couldn't go to all the schools. They were banned from school just like black kids.
Right.
But also recognize that many Holocaust survivors who came to this country, they found jobs on HBCU campuses. They were part of the faculty there. And so whether it was Howard University, my alma mater, Tougaloo, or Morehouse, or Fisk, it became this immersion of the experience that came from Germany, Holocaust victims, the realities of African Americans who had to live in the South, who did not flee the South, did not flee for the North, but it was led by young people who had enough courage to recognize they needed to fight for their freedoms, but they had enough freedom of thought to reach beyond the norm in their communities to invite others in. And you had a community of young people who parents or grandparents who were survivors, they heard the horror stories and they seen the obligations to get involved. And that immersion really led the civil rights movement in the way in which it was more community-centric, not egocentric about the personality, but on the ground with people. Whether it was Ira Gerber, I could name a bunch of them, right? Because these were the SNCC people that I sat around with, from Julian Bond along, and they recognized the divisiveness of religious theology and recognized the cultural and moral obligations of religious participations. You don't read and then pray about it, you read and act upon it.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, President Johnson. Rabbi Schneier, would you like to respond?
I just want to conclude President Johnson's remarks by reminding us all that not only blacks and Jews do we share a common faith, but we share a common fate. And it's that single destiny that must strengthen our bonds of concern, compassion, and caring for each other. As President Johnson so eloquently spoke about seeing the other, because when you see the humanity in the other, only then you can preserve it within yourself.
Absolutely.
And if I was a preacher, I'd say common faith, common fate. That'd preach on Sunday morning.
No, that's what
That'd preach on Sunday morning.
By all means. It'll be your first sermon under rabbinical supervision. All right.
President Johnson and Rabbi Schneier, what a wonderful discussion. Sadly, we must conclude. I feel privileged to have had this conversation with both of you. During Black History Month, we have so much to celebrate, and reflecting on the Black-Jewish relationship that brought about so many significant social and political changes to our country reminds us that there is so much more work to be done. But having the two of you at the helm in the leadership of your respective organizations, working together, bringing our communities together in solidarity with one another, I can only forecast an even better and brighter future for the state of Black-Jewish relations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.